all been bedazzled by technology and the popular music and films the last 20 years. But now let's get down to brass tacks, ladies and gentlemen, and finally bring home the fact that of the 5 boroughs, Manhattan is the best. I mean, you're all from the Upper West Side, so you happen to know that the movie poster for the film Brooklyn uses the font for The New Yorker, which is in Manhattan. Now, I myself am originally from Colorado. Please do not let my flowery blouse or my golden lariat necklace fool you. I've never lived in Brooklyn. I have no intention to. I've lived in Manhattan for 20 years. I've lived here so long that when I moved into my rent-stabilized apartment in Spanish Harlem, it was still known as imperialism. Now, as we've established here today, New York is comprised of 5 boroughs. There's Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. And yet, whenever anyone talks about New York City, you always think of Manhattan. Now, why is that, ladies and gentlemen? It's plain and simple. We've got the Empire State Building, Grand Central Terminal, Square, the Chrysler Building, Central Park, the Zeckendorf Towers, need I go on? And it's true, such magnificent feats of artistry and architecture do inspire petty-minded crooks to try to deface them as a feeble way of enforcing their own illusory identity. Why, look at this picture. It's destroyed Manhattan. Oh no, actually it's Williamsburg, ladies and gentlemen. Williamsburg, even the most famous neighborhood in Brooklyn, has no distinguishing characteristics. You see, their Williamsburg was actually designed to be a disposable shanty town for dock workers, and the fact that it hasn't burned down to the ground already is a careless oversight. Anyone in the audience celebrating have a wedding coming up soon? I know you do. Well, I have a suggestion. What would really make your wedding gown pop, Sue Smith? Standing in front of a decrepit warehouse in Greenpoint. Yes. But don't settle for that particular warehouse. There are plenty of decrepit garbage architectural heaps all the way through Brooklyn. The capital of warehouses. The warehouse, the horrible structure designed to hide things you don't want to look at. Now, anyone who has dreamed of living in New York because of the Barclays Center should be ignored outright, since they were probably born after it was built in 2012. And babies are not to be trusted. In fact, Brooklyn has come to be thought less of a place and more as an aesthetic or a lifestyle that corporate shills can export to Europeans. In fact, I went on a vacation to England trying to get over a breakup with someone who lives in Greenpoint and stumbled into a pub called Far Rockaway, ladies and gentlemen. That's in London. You can go there and... That's Queens. Okay. I'd like to this brings up a very important point. Yes, it is. All right, it's Queens. I'm going to accept that. And Queens is, of course, technically Long Island. But then, of course, so is Brooklyn. Now, of course, the greatest icon of New York, which is technically in New Jersey if we want to pick nits, but that's for another debate, is the Statue of Liberty. Now, at the base of the statue is a plaque featuring Emma Lazarus's famous poem, The New Colossus, which I will quote in brief. She says, "Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame." No, she's not. She's not talking about Minneapolis, St. Paul. She's actually talking about Manhattan and Brooklyn, because at the time of the writing of that poem, they were actually separate cities. Before I go into this, I would just like to address something. Yes, Donald Trump is from Queens. He might have infiltrated Manhattan, but then we'll see that others have infiltrated Manhattan as well. And Kenny, to your point, Manhattan beards suck. Well, if that were the case, then I don't think that Katie Holmes and Nicole Kidman would continue to come and make films. Okay. So as it happened, when New York City broke ground in the 1860s on the Brooklyn Bridge. Oh, there's Emma Lazarus. Oh, I'm going backwards. We're going back through time, folks. Okay. When the ground was broken on the Brooklyn Bridge in the 1860s, Brooklyn, a separate city, one of the twin city to Manhattan, the politicians in Brooklyn realized that they had a great opportunity on their hands. That they said, you know, now we don't have to rely on ferries to escape our emotionally retarded boyfriends, whose frankly terrible bands we couldn't care less about. With the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, it was clear that merging the twin cities could prove a huge economic boost to Brooklyn. And so both Brooklyn and Manhattan politicians agreed that they wanted to move ahead with this agreement. And yet it was met with great resistance from Brooklyn locals, who feared that merging with Manhattan would threaten their Protestant values and let minorities in. Well, nevertheless, the deal was made, and Brooklyn was consolidated into what was then known as Greater New York City, which is now just New York City. Any medical professionals in the house? Anyone? Med school, nurses, intake people, psychiatric hospitals. Is anyone trained in first aid? Very good. All right, this is for you. So then you will be familiar with a process which is known as vanishing twin syndrome, which according to WebMD is the quote, when the tissue of a severely defective twin is dependent on the cardiovascular system of the other intact twin. Manhattan, Brooklyn. I mean, just look at this. I mean, okay. Films, literature are filled to the brim of terrifying tales of parasitic twins. Stephen King's The Dark Half. Need I go on? I mean, just look at the seals of the respective cities of New York and Brooklyn. New York, we're here trying to make friends with the natives that we're exploiting. And on the Brooklyn seal, the woman is literally carrying an axe, ladies and gentlemen. She's up to no good. Now, it is my belief that the headaches, anxiety, and nausea that we living in Manhattan experience on a daily basis are not caused by feeling isolated from nature or being caught up in a frantic capitalist garbage can. No, they are the classic symptoms of parasitic twin syndrome. Like Betty Davis holding a gun to her own head in the riveting film Dead Ringer, we are all in Manhattan in danger of being held hostage by this life-sucking wasteland known as Brooklyn, the partially absorbed evil twin of Manhattan. We must either finish digesting this aberration as a community or